the visit was inconclusive. Tom Droege found no proof of overunity, but nor could he disprove it. Griggs has installed 9 machines so far, and in each case it's caused some surprise. 250 miles away, for example, a Griggs machine has been heating the water for Albany Fire Station for over a year.
Right after our initial installation, we measured the output with Jim's team, representatives from a local university, one of our local power companies, and we were all astounded with the output. Our measurements indicated that the system was more than 100% efficient, which is very hard to believe. The average engineer would say baloney. But our measuring devices were certified, and until someone comes along and proves us different, we will say that it is more than 100% efficient.
The scientific jury is still out on the Griggs machine, and the debate rumbles on across the internet. But the idea of a challenge to physics coming from such a direction is one that is rejected by leading particle physicist Frank Close.
What would be revolutionary would be if you summed up all of the energy released and you found that the sum total was greater than you put in at the start. Then you'd be generating energy for free. And this would overthrow 300 years of experience, which has become embodied in what we call the principle of the conservation of energy. You can change energy from one form to another, but the sum total always balances.
Science guys don't like non-science guys inventing things. And it's discredited almost immediately. Whether you talk about the high priest in Egypt or you talk about the monks that had the monasteries in the Black Plague, they were the caretakers of knowledge. And I think the caretakers of knowledge look with disdain on commoners who think they have knowledge.
The fact is that Jim Griggs and his machine are by no means alone. Not only in America, but in both Russia and Japan, for example, there are reports of machines that seem to tap an unexplained source of energy. They don't all involve water, but they do all seem to produce more energy than they use. What's more, this is by no means a modern phenomenon. The debate goes back at least to the turn of the century. Today, Nikola Tesla is almost unknown. 100 years ago, he was regarded as one of the most prolific and inventive engineers the world has ever known. At a time when Edison was persuading great cities like New York and London to install costly and inefficient direct current generating stations, Tesla, backed only by Westinghouse and defying all critics, invented the system for the vastly more efficient alternating current, which now powers the entire modern world. Famous Tesla coil, he was able to produce hitherto undreamed of voltages. Tesla had a vision of what he called a universal energy field, which he believed would eventually be tapped. He wrote, "Throughout space there is energy. It is a mere question of time when men will succeed in attaching their machinery to the very wheelwork of nature." Unfortunately, his extreme love of showmanship, demonstrated in these photographs, didn't help his cause. But he persuaded the power company Westinghouse to build him a power station devoted entirely to his laboratory. Here he built the biggest coil he'd ever constructed and set to work to tap the universal energy field. He experimented with power levels and frequencies that had never been approached before. Several million volts, pulsing at 50,000 cycles per second. This was big science, difficult to reproduce even today. But Tesla was working in uncharted territories. As he wound the voltage and the frequencies up, there was a great and still unexplained surge of excess power created at the very heart of the machine. It was so powerful, it flowed back up the cables, overriding the safety circuits. The entire power station was burned out. And it turned out to be the beginning of the end for Tesla. His reputation never recovered. He spent the last 20 years of his life in relative obscurity. Even today, his experiments remain only vaguely understood and largely ignored. The story leaps on to Moscow in 1980. A physicist named Alexander Chernetsky was working along similar lines to Tesla, although on a laboratory scale. In addition to his measurements, he had a crude system of light bulbs to indicate power output. Under certain conditions, with high voltages and high pulse rates, he stumbled upon a startling effect. He writes of a surge of power at the heart of the apparatus and a sharp increase in power output. Over a period of 4 years, his research indicated that this apparatus could generate 5 times the power it consumed. Few of the scientific establishment in Russia or elsewhere took his claims seriously, but one top physicist from the West, interested in fringe science, did go to see Chernetsky in 1991.
We went to see his device. It was a very sort of dramatic demonstration. I was impressed. I went home at the first night in Moscow and didn't sleep very much trying to figure out how this thing could be working, whether it was a trick, what principles could truly be involved.
Chernetsky's papers talk of tapping the energy of the vacuum, language very reminiscent of Tesla, and a report published by the Russian news agency Novosti describes some of the extraordinary potential implications of his research, not least a new and non-polluting power-generating industry. Stimulated by what he'd seen, Puthoff finalized arrangements for Chernetsky to continue his work in the US. The Russian died suddenly in 1992, and no one has taken up his research. The work of Tesla, Chernetsky, Jim Griggs and others has been largely ignored by the scientific establishment, almost certainly because it poses too big a threat to reputations and research grants to dabble with such revolutionary stuff. But that is now changing. The freedom of the internet has begun to break the stranglehold of an establishment dominated by peer review. And as more of these devices have come to light, 1 or 2 mainstream scientists have begun to tackle the issues. One possible explanation for these startling results does lie within the current laws of science. It's a concept known as zero-point energy.
Physicists know that we're immersed in something called zero-point energy. It has the name zero point. We give it that name because even if we were to cool this entire room down to absolute zero in terms of its temperature, that energy would still remain. It might be surprising to think that at absolute zero everything would freeze out and there would be any energy left, but in fact that's the case.
Andrei Sakharov, the Soviet physicist, argued that we should regard all matter as floating in a universal sea of energy. Modern physics tells us that the space between the stars and the space between the particles which make up matter are filled with vast amounts of fluctuating energy, fluctuations which are fundamental to our view of the fabric of nature. So if we think of an atom with its nucleus and its orbiting electrons, modern physics tells us that there is a basic fuzziness about the energy levels of the electrons, rather like an out-of-focus photograph. We cannot tell both the position and the speed at the same time. Moreover, the random fluctuations in energy levels can be intense enough to spring pairs of particles spontaneously from the vacuum, only to disappear again, energy into matter and back into energy again, as Einstein taught us. This is one of the most extraordinary manifestations of zero-point energy. But just how much of this energy is there? Can it ever be tapped?
It turns out this energy is quite intense. Nobel laureate Feynman, one of Einstein's protégés, Wheeler, loved to comment on how intense this energy is. The way Wheeler puts it is there's enough energy in the volume of a coffee cup, in fact more than enough, to evaporate all the world's oceans. The potential of this is vast. You could go all the way from having a replacement never-say-die battery for your electric toothbrush, all the way up to powering aircraft carriers and spaceships.
If there is such a thing as zero-point energy, and if you can tap it, it's like living next to Grand Coulee Dam. If you know how to drill a hole through the dam and use the water pressure that comes out, it's there for you to use.
Could Tesla, or Chernetsky, or even Big Jim Griggs from Georgia have chanced to cross the key that unlocks not only this unfathomable sea of energy, but also some of the mysteries of the universe? Zero-point energy has been called the possible Rosetta Stone of physics.
What the Rosetta Stone allowed you to do is translate from one language to another language that you've never seen before, because one of them you recognized. We have several different laws that attempt to describe the universe. There is no unified theory. There's three separate theories. If indeed the Rosetta Stone existed, then you would allow these theories to merge into one, and you would understand the source and origin of the universe and how it's put together.